technology.
Okay.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I mean,
Yeah.
they were.
Wouldn't you know that?
Well, they were offices.
Uh-huh.
They were offices, so it wasn't like server farm or anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so can you remind me the class?
It's environmental ethics,
Mhm.
taught by Dr. Jane Compson,
Uh-huh.
and the subject is environmental justice.
Right.
Please state your name and organization affiliation.
Okay, my name is Mark Pendras, and I am an associate professor of urban studies here at the University of Washington, Tacoma, in the urban studies program.
What is environmental justice?
Well, to me, environmental justice is a concept that comes out of a really specific political movement to recognize how we tend to devalue many of our environmental spaces in cities. So I come at it very much from an urbanist point of view. So environmental justice is a movement that emerged out of this recognition, this reality that urban environmental conditions were, first of all, quite poor, that we tend to treat the urban environment in a really harmful way. We view the urban environment in a really negative light, and as a result of that, we worry less about the kinds of environmental conditions that we create in urban areas, and so that sort of general pattern of worrying less or caring less about what I talk about and what is often written about as nearby nature or as environmental conditions in cities, that the consequences of that are not equally shared by everyone, so that some people are able to place themselves for one reason or another. Maybe it's because of class position or racial or ethnic composition, that they place themselves out of harm's way in urban areas, and other classes and other people from different ethnic and racial categories bear the brunt of many of the environmental problems that we experience in cities.
How does or doesn't environmental justice work in your community, and what needs to be changed?
Mm-hmm. I can't say that I know all that much about the particular environmental justice conditions, say, in the city of Tacoma. So I live in the city of Tacoma. I think most cities in the United States still reflect social and economic and ethnic and racial polarization and segregation. And so, and research has shown that along those lines you get patterns of environmental injustice. So the implication then would be that we're going to see many of those same patterns expressed in Tacoma. It is somewhat interesting that some of the most polluted landscapes in Tacoma, often associated with the Asarco plant, am I pointing in the right direction? Yeah, I guess it would be that way. In Tacoma is, well, it was kind of an abandoned piece of property for a long time, but is being redeveloped as very much of a wealthy community, or a place that's going to be built for high-income populations. So whether that space is fully cleaned up or it turns out to be a kind of love canal problem, see what happens there in the future.
What parts of environmental justice are important to you, and why or why not?
So it's really, what I find important about the environmental justice movement is exactly what I was talking about before, that recognition that that nearby nature or urban environmental conditions are just as important as the environmental conditions that we often tend to value in these kind of legally protected spaces out, and whether it's national parks or national forests or wilderness areas and so on. So it's not that those other spaces that we typically focus on as being especially important are not important. They absolutely are, but recognizing the importance of these environmental spaces in urban areas, and then also the connections between those two conditions. So that maintaining, protecting these spaces that we've set off in areas outside of our cities, maintaining those spaces as protected spaces depends in large part on our ability to see and value nearby nature and improve environmental conditions in cities. So that's how I think of the environmental justice movement.
Okay.
Environmental justice in itself requires a redefinition of what we mean by environment. So the environment is central to environmental justice, but the environment doesn't just mean non-human natural processes. It includes humans, and it includes paying attention to our working environments, and again, it can be health conditions, whether it's air quality or water quality, and these types of things. So I can't really separate out some types of environmental conditions from other types of environmental conditions when we're talking about environmental justice. So
would you say like different environments have different ethical natures that go with it? So for instance, if you're in an urban area like the city of Tacoma, it would be a separate set of rules that would justify how the people should treat the environment, as opposed to something like a forest where people should just admire it instead of cutting it down.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're definitely going to have different spaces with different rules, right? So because you can't really have a place like a national park or a national forest or a wilderness area without, what makes those places distinct is the rules of behavior that accompany them, right? So that wilderness area, right, is very specific about not building roads, and that humans can't go and stay there for a long time, and these types of things. So that definitely there's going to be some distinction. But we need to recognize those spaces and these spaces as linked, right? So that behaviors can differ in the different spaces, but the overall environmental conditions are going to rise and fall with our behavior in both of those spaces.
How does concern for the environment fit with other environmental justice concerns, such as sustainability, health, nature?
Mm-hmm. So as I mentioned, I'm not specifically involved in environmental justice struggles in Tacoma, so I can't really say that it is useful or not useful for me in those struggles, because I'm not involved in them. But I can say that environmental justice is central to how I view cities and contemporary life, right? That it is that we need to find ways of seeing and valuing and expanding nature and improving environmental conditions in cities, or we are in trouble in general, right? That we're going to be less, if we fail to take on and really work with the challenges of environmental justice, then we are going to have a much more difficult time producing positive environmental conditions in general, right? So that the environmental justice is central to the production of positive environmental conditions more generally, right? So in that sense, I think that environmental justice is essential.
Well, I have another question.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, since you're saying, like, well, it's kind of like how technology is always kind of evolving every day. So, Do you think that one day environmental ethics or environmental justice would just kind of be like set aside because technology would be so advanced that it could take care of all the problems in the environment, or do you think it's something that would just be ongoing, where it's going to be one problem that's going to lead to another problem, and so on and so forth?
Yeah. I think environmental problems are social problems. So I don't see how we can solve environmental problems through technology. Or I guess another way that I tend to think of it is that we don't have negative environmental conditions because we don't recognize that we're acting or behaving in destructive ways, right? We have negative environmental conditions because we can't seem to work out socially, collectively, how to improve them, right? So it's to me, it's not a question of science or technology. It's a question of social relations and politics, and so we have to improve how we relate with each other in order to improve environmental conditions. And if we can't do that, then I don't really have a whole lot of faith that we're going to be able to improve environmental conditions in the ways that we often talk about. So ultimately, these are social questions, which is why I think also environmental justice is so central to these questions. Mm-hmm. That if we can't figure out the justice component of environmental questions, then we're not going to be able to figure out those environmental questions if we are trying to separate them out those ways.
Is there anything else that you would like to say about this topic?
Not really, right? I feel like I covered it. I'll be happy to answer more questions. Mm-hmm. I think that I'd just be retreading. Whatever.